Welcome, everyone, to the Embracing Brokenness podcast. We are so glad you could join us today. If you are here for the first time, we are in a series that we've entitled God Stories. And we've invited a number of people, 3 before this, and this was the 4th in our series, to come on and tell us a little bit about what has happened in their life that God has done in ways that are really changing the trajectory of their lives. And, all of us, during the course of our life in Christ, once we've made that decision to follow him, have had an experience, or many, that have really changed how we've seen God, seen ourselves, and how we look at life, and even how we approach life in this space in the middle that we occupy, where God is calling us up into greater purpose, greater understanding in our own identity, and to live out this life in a very special way. So I've invited Cathie Rosado to join us. So without further ado, I'll invite her right here on screen with me. Well, hey, welcome, Cathie. I'm glad you could join me. It's been, maybe a few months since we connected, hasn't it been? I think it was an event that we were at. I want to say with Kristen, who the last podcast we did, she joined us, right?
Yes, we were. We were at the Dream Big conference.
Yeah. Which she talked about a little bit. And it's so funny because how worlds intersect in Lancaster County is always fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's an overlap as to how we even met the same way that Kristen and I met. Am I wrong there? Am I right?
No, you are correct. I heard you because of WJTL, and I connected with you after you had been on there. So yeah, it's almost an exact duplicate.
Couldn't have planned that. I mean, that was, I don't know how many years ago. We were trying to figure that out. A few now, but you were doing it was a business that you were kind of working with, right, at the time, the bounce house business.
Yes.
So we talked about doing some coaching, little bit of, I don't know, kingdom coaching, I guess it was, but the way it turned out.
Exactly.
On not only the business side, but ministry side, because that's always been your heart. So for any of you who wonder, a little bit about Cathie's story. We're going to get into it in a second, but she wrote a book, and so I'm going to pause for a second to tell you about that. But part of what I read here, your story, which I knew, of course, but our listeners don't know much about, kind of does tie to the fact that this is a small little world we live here in Lancaster County, and there were so many intersections of how not only we connected, but then I watched God unfold this amazing story for you in the book, in the part where, the author's kind of bio section. You mentioned the fact 250 years of family history here. Why does that not surprise me that you know that? Did you do a little research? Did you for that?
I'm kind of a little bit of a nerd when it comes to genealogical research. So yeah, Lancaster County, we've got Hans Herr, and somewhere way back through there, one of the young ladies with the last name of Herr married into somebody who eventually, linked up to me. So yes.
Wow.
So while my name was not her, it's I did have a connection.
Is most of the case. I did that little, what is it, ancestry or something during COVID, the big C word I want to use, but just to try to do a little research, and it's fascinating. I found, the step 4th cousin 6 times removed of John Adams, the president. So
there you go.
When you do your homework, it's amazing what you can find. You ended up, kind of just such a fascinating story because your family ties were so critically important to you. And I know a big part of your story is that, but you did sort of, the odds you say were stacked against you. We'll talk about that in a minute, but you did attend University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School, which it's pretty impressive, I think. I mean, you were accounting and entrepreneurial, is it management major? Is that right?
Yes.
And then you went on to Penn State for an MBA. And so just a great, I know you, like our listeners don't know you. You are, what was the word you used when you jotted me that email?
I think it was something like, superwoman.
Yes. And I'm like, okay, who calls themselves superwomen? And then when I started to hear your story, I'm like, no, this is superwoman. It's like, because it's like, who can keep the pace that you keep? I have no idea, but God finds a way not only to help you navigate it, but to get some amazing things accomplished. And when you told me you were going to write this, choosing plan A, I thought, well, of course you will. And it'll probably be done in about 3 weeks. Without further ado, let's talk about this. This is so the subtitle is I have to read it because it's long, but a mother's adventure with adoption, acceptance after miscarriage, and acknowledging the miracle of children. And you have quite a few because down here under Cathie Rosado, it says, mother of one step, 2 adopted, 3 natural in heaven, and 4 natural on earth. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that's your accounting background coming out because it worked out perfectly, even though you couldn't have planned it that way.
No, I didn't plan it that way, but it makes for a good story.
Yes, which is a great story. No wonder you wrote about it. So, all right. So tell us all a little bit about, how writing this, and it's such an important story, how it all came about for you.
Sure. I had people for many, many years tell me I should write my story. And I kept saying, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Maybe when I get to retirement and I have some free time. And the reality was I didn't know the first thing about writing a book. So there were 2 things I needed, time and knowledge. And so it just so happened that about the time we were selling the business, my calendar kind of opened up. I didn't have as many requirements sort of every day in, day out. So that kind of gave me the time piece. And then I needed knowledge. Well, I had no idea where to even look for that kind of thing. And, I still wasn't sure I wanted to do this. It was more of like, if God wants this to happen, he's going to have to make it abundantly clear. And he literally just started putting the pieces in place. And so, here I was with a little extra time. We had a freak accident with a polo ball, which I talk about in the book, which then led me to changing churches, which then led me to meeting somebody, which led me to a Release the Writer conference. And, and I ended up meeting the woman that helped me take the book from a basic Word document to a published piece, and it was a total God thing, and along the way, there were all kinds of bumps in the road. I mean, my publisher ended up with like a freak accident and having to have major eye surgery. And so she couldn't even see to work on the book.
Gosh.
Then we finally got going again. And then COVID hit and we, just trying to get it through the printer's shop because, they had to have everything cleaned every day and people weren't showing up for work and people were sick. And it was just, but I was like, what, when God's ready for it, it'll come out.
Well, that's the thing. I think we have a timing, like we have our objectives, our goals. And I talk about this a lot, even in other podcasts and what I've written and things that with friends, even like that, our timing is just rarely God's timing. I have found that out. I mean, it happens, but there is obviously a reason why the delays, because it needed, and I'm sure you have story after story as to what, how it landed in people's hands and how much of a blessing your story has been to others. And we will put in the show notes for anybody that is interested as to how they can get their hands on this, because there's so much here, especially, with moms and parenting and everything that you've experienced. And it's just miraculous, the loss, the grief, and the different things that you've talked about in this book and how that all helped form you and to form how God sees you. And so it just is incredible that you were able to pull it off. And I know it was a lot, but you really worked hard to tell it. So for that reason, let's jump in a little bit. Tell us give us, I don't know, it's not necessarily the Cliff Notes, but for anybody that knows what that is, right? But to give us the broad picture, okay, so you were motivated to write your story. We understand that, but in it, what was your hopes, your goals, what would you hope a reader would gain from a knowledge of what you went through?
Sure. So there's the natural side of it that if somebody is considering adoption, it's not necessarily easy, but it can be done. Even if your child comes in with a lot of struggles and there's a lot of difficulties, there is hope. God does redeem all kinds of situations, there's also the side of, if you've battled infertility, if you've been through loss, it's not easy. But God can redeem that too. And, in my case, I mean, they told me I'd probably never have children, and God said, yeah, I get the last laugh on this one. And ironically, the doctor who said that to me delivered 3 out of the 4,
Oh,
haha.
yeah,
I
probably.
was trying to decide after the fact, was that like a good marketing technique? Tell the Christian woman that, she's not going to have any babies so that she comes back to you over and over and over again. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
But, so it was kind of, there's hope after all that kind of stuff. But really my heart in writing it was that somewhere in the pages of the book, if somebody didn't know anything about Christ, if they didn't know who Jesus is, that somehow they would find him, because at the end of the day, if you boil down the gospel, we are supposed to be adopted into his family,
Yes.
And so I kind of, the book is called Choosing Plan A. It was sort of a takeoff on the whole concept of often adoption is everybody's plan B. But in this case, it became my plan A. I actually adopted long before I ended up realizing I was going to have problems having children. And then before the kids came along. So,
Wow.
I kind of did everything in reverse. But, God also chooses us and we are his plan A. So, it's really I was trying to kind of get that all the way across that,
Yes.
yeah, it might be about, having kids and adoption and stuff. But really, at the end of the day, have you found Christ and, what he has planned for your life?
Yes, that's beautiful, because it really makes such a huge difference. We know, for those of us who've made the decision to follow him, we know the final outcome. But there's so much space between then and now when we make that choice and when he comes again. We think could be tonight, but
yeah,
boy, there's so much that we're called up into this adventure. The idea of God's stories to begin with is that God is calling us into an adventure. Now, you had one. Well, you had several.
I continue to have one.
It's not just one big adventure. There's all kinds of fun stuff that you got yourself into, but it starts with deciding that you want to make yourself available. And so in the end, what you're hoping for is that along the way that someone will step up and acknowledge him as their Lord and Savior and make a decision to join us in heaven someday.
Yeah.
So what was the biggest surprise? You set out to write this. What in the process surprised you the most about this, going through this and even deciding like what do we put into these 200 plus pages? I mean, it's a substantial story and it's well worth every nickel. So yeah, what was it what did you surprise you? I guess,
I always thought about, wow, it would be cool to write a book, but that's a lot of words.
Yeah.
50,000 words is roughly what that book is. And I'm like, can I even do that? And it was interesting, as I've read back through it from time to time or, pulled out chunks of it, some of it doesn't even sound like me. Like, I feel like God was actually scripting stuff onto the page, presumably because somebody's supposed to read it. And I'm like, did I actually write that?
Wow.
And it almost kind of gave me that revelation. Like, when the guys were sitting down writing the books of the Bible, like, did they have that sort of same experience that they got to the end of it and they went, did I write that? Yeah, maybe I was really literally just being a scribe, I had my pencil out, but it wasn't really me. It wasn't my words, it was, so that was kind of interesting, and just, going through it and sort of God just, bringing stuff back to my memory and sort of putting pieces together. I mean, I talk in the beginning a little bit about, the influence of all these different people over my life. And it's like, I could see, God was laying these little tiny nuggets along the way that would eventually lead me to where I was, to make adoption seem normal, and I mean, right down to like a neighbor that happened to, have children that, not all the skin colors matched, and just kind of learning to see that as it's okay. It's normal. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be, super different. I talk in there a little bit about a crazy tree that was in our front yard.
The dogwood tree, right?
Was grafted. Yeah, it was a dogwood tree. And somewhere along the line, the thing had been grafted. So it was multiple colors. And, the irony of my family ending up with multiple colors.
You have a cross-cultural, that's your family, right? Yeah. And it's sort of, so for people that don't know that, there's a little bit of there's just a mix of cultures represented not only in your family, but the people that even you come in contact with, you influence. And I think, and so a substantial amount of our listeners and viewers, by the way, we're doing this on video on YouTube and also on Spotify. If you can get video, or Amazon Music, there's places you can watch this. So I'll show you how to get there too. But you'll see that Cathie and I are about as white as the sky right now. So, well, not the sky, the clouds of the sky. So during the process of, adopting, there's so many challenges. A lot of our listeners, and I know that the majority are female listeners, I believe, based on demographics I'm seeing and hearing about. Many have struggled with this decision, like even to understand, when do I give up if I can't have children naturally? When do I stop that process? And I knew many that did and chose to adopt, and then all of a sudden they get pregnant, right? So it's like there's all kinds of stories like that. How do you weave yours into that? Like what was the really cool thing that came out of that?
For me, I didn't know I was going to have trouble having kids. So the adoption was literally, I got a phone call and needed to take in my husband's great niece and great nephew. So it wasn't even necessarily this conscious choice, but there were all these little steps earlier on where God was sort of laying the foundation. He was planting the seeds in my heart. So when that moment came that the phone rang, it wasn't like, well, now let me stop and think about this. It was just the natural reaction and answer out of my heart was yes. It wasn't, I had to stop and think. It was just, yes, I will do this.
That's great.
And even, honestly, after, having all the miscarriages and stuff, when we legally adopted the kids, I honestly kind of had that thought like, oh, watch, next month I'm going to find out I'm pregnant, and, voila. And it didn't happen, and it didn't happen, and it didn't happen. And, and so and then it's like, okay, after my first miscarriage, it was 4 years, and I finally got pregnant again. And then I lost that one. And, and so there was a lot of just, hoping and hoping and hoping, but, God was just orchestrating stuff. Crazy things. Like I wouldn't have been able to go to Taiwan on a business trip had I been pregnant, but I came back, and then I did get pregnant, and I carried a term, and, and so, God's timing is always perfect, even when we don't realize it. It says in the Bible that all things work together for good, but sometimes that takes a really long time,
Right.
And, sometimes we're like, man, I'm just so broken. I'm falling apart. And Lord, have you forgotten me in this? But he hasn't. It's just, it's his timing, and it eventually will happen. If he's, whatever it is, something's going to give. And
and we talk a lot about journey. We talk a lot about in the ministry, embracing brokenness means that there are pieces that are broken, not just in us, but around us, and the world that we live in, with the imperfect way that we even came on the scene. Well, not on the scene. On the scene, it was perfect environment. And then we made a choice that really felt each one of us. So our anticipation or expectations are flawed. Sometimes we were talking about it earlier, like this timing thing. What I loved, what you said earlier, and I don't want to forget to refer to it, is when you were writing on those pages, and the biblical accounts were totally inspired by God. We know that they're 100% inerrant truth of his, and they were inspired and passed down by generations and generations and thousands of years. I felt that same way. Like when I'm doing my writing, and I've done it, in preparation for the book we're going to launch this year, there is almost that spiritual Holy Spirit moment, isn't there? Like when you start typing and stuff comes out and you go, okay, where'd that come from? Should that stay there? Should it not?
Yeah.
But it's also that way in our life. Like we step into like the unknown, which you did. You adopted, you didn't know that you couldn't have kids. So It wasn't like, wow, okay. I know someday I'll have my own and we'll just mix it up. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, then there's the blip. Then there's the brokenness. Then there's this piece on the radar screen. You go, oh, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
So there had to be pieces of that in your, oh gosh, in the mourning process, in the stress of going through not only the physical pieces of losing a baby, and my first wife and I we lost a child. So we have a young son. He's probably not real young now, but in heaven that we'll get to know someday, just like you're 3, right?
Yep.
But that doesn't make it easier to go through that experience, though, does it?
Yeah.
Like sometimes you just got to walk in the pain.
Oh yeah. And it's interesting because I mean, even as long as, I would say I've healed from all of it,
Mm.
but sometimes stuff just still trigger things to come back up. Interestingly, when my oldest one turned, basically I say, he turned 21 in heaven, I was actually shocked at how that sort of kind of rattled me for several days. It was like, wow, this he's been gone. I mean, here it'd be like, oh, we're gonna go out and we're gonna do all kinds of crazy stuff because you're turning 21.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
get that out of our system and move on with life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And been there, done that, whatever.
Yes.
But it was an interesting experience to feel that. And I've talked to other women who say, sometimes there's the certain triggering birthdays or stuff that just kind of brings it up again. And you don't necessarily go back to square one grieving, but sometimes it hurts. Sometimes you remember, you don't necessarily ever forget, but you get to a point where you're able to deal with it and put it into perspective. And I mean, I know I'm going to see my kids again. I know my mother's up there having fun with them. I know my grandmother's got them well under control, and it'll work.
Well, but and that's a great point. But in your case, like, did God meet you in that moment? Was there an experience that you had as you're kind of grieving or sitting or looking back on that time and going, oh, wow, like it did hurt. Like I miss what might have been, yet I know I'm going to see again. Did he meet you in a special way during that process?
Actually in the book, I talk a little bit about when I was actually anticipating the second miscarriage. They had basically said they couldn't find a heartbeat. They were waiting to see, it was like they didn't want to kind of pull the trigger and take a baby that just hadn't grown enough yet to show a heartbeat. And so there was this period of just waiting and waiting and waiting, and it was becoming more and more stressful. And I literally collapsed in the kitchen. I think it was mostly, stress and everything else. And then I was laying down and I literally had a vision, and I saw my grandmother in heaven with a little 4-year-old child on one side and a baby in her arms. And at that point, I had complete peace that, now I was going to go deal with the doctors because my body was not rejecting this baby. I knew the baby was in heaven. And I was going to be okay, and it was interesting because my mother was still alive at the time. And she said, well, what did my mom look like? And I said, I couldn't really articulate details. But what I took away from it was, I said, I saw this woman who, I knew it was her, and she had the muscle mass of a 30-year-old. Now, when my grandmother had passed away, she was bent over, she was frail, and what I needed to come away with was the peace that my children were being well taken care of. My grandmother, when she passed away, would have struggled with, toddlers and stuff,
Of
but
course.
here she was. I saw this, this youthful body, because we supposedly get new bodies. So I'm cool with it. I can go back to those 30 muscles. And,
well, I think 30s, that's my philosophy is 30s. That's where Jesus was. That's when I was in the best shape. So yeah, I'm with you.
I was doing pretty good even in my late 30s because I was moving around. But yeah, I mean, so I had complete peace. I knew my kids were going to be well taken care of, and I'd see them again. And then I could deal with the earthly stuff, but, and God does all kinds of crazy stuff to sort of minister to you. And, some might say, oh, there's no way he did that. Well, he did.
He did. Yeah. And listen, you have a vast variety of people watching or listening here. And so some have never experienced anything like that, I'm sure. I have a couple occasions where the Holy Spirit kind of gives you a vision of like what's happening in a certain environment you maybe never were in. And certainly, we know that Jesus is taking care of the little ones, which probably aren't all that little. We don't know, right? So we don't know, but we do know that was a comforting thought that he planted in your heart and mind just at the time you needed it most. And that's how God speaks to us. And, this is not a series on hearing from God, but it is part of the God story that you are sharing in this book and that you have shared with me in the past, and I have shared with others. It comes by developing a deeper intimacy with him. And I can't help but believe that pieces of your journey that you chronicled here have everything to do with how close and how able you are now to see something like that, or for God to minister or help you to see something, or for you to just develop that intimacy on a deeper level, because that's how we get through this. Like we weren't promised happiness. We just got a shot at joy, a glimpse. And we're doing a book study, C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. And his autobiography is about that joy experience that he had going from atheist to theist to Christian theist to, a believer in Jesus. It is a fascinating story that we all have our share of what that looks like.
Right.
But getting here or getting there is where God really wants us. It's not about what we're doing for him, even though I know, oh my gosh, you were extremely active. You still are with your kids. We're going to get into that in a minute. But it really is about being, not doing. It's the old human being, not human doing,
Yep.
So yeah, share some other things from this that your take, or maybe somebody that was impacted by this. I'm sure you've heard a story or two about this.
I've had some, sort of wild adventures, and I had a woman reach out to me, and, she called me and she said, your book encouraged me so much, because she kind of was in a place where her adopted children were really just struggling and could not get things together. And, she was like, is there any hope? And I'm like, oh yeah, there's hope. Jesus can turn around anybody in an instant when they let him. So, it encouraged her that, don't give up, even though it's hard, even though, it's long days and stuff. I mean, we would love to have sunshine and flowers all the time, but the reality is sometimes there's darkness and thorns, but if you just keep pursuing God, I mean, he's got a plan for everybody. It says that in the Bible.
Amen. Yeah.
And so, just keep stepping forward in that plan. I mean, sometimes your steps are little baby steps as opposed to a nice confident sprint.
Yes.
But just keep moving forward. I mean, you may even find yourself crawling, whatever it takes, just keep moving forward, and find people around you that can kind of encourage you as you're going through those tough times. It's, we go through the valleys. It's like, it doesn't say we have to go through the valley alone. He's there, and we can grab some friends and get through that valley.
Well said. You created your community of kids between the adopted and the natural ones. So you got people all over the place around your place. Even the ones that are probably, off the payroll now, you still have access.
Yes.
Yeah.
The ones that are starting to create new ones for me.
Well, there's that. There's that space between a teenager and whatever they decide to do, whether it's college or something else, that they're still on the payroll. But I get that. I had one. Let me tell you, it was great. It's wonderful. I can't imagine having as many as you have around. And that's also taming a husband too. How about that? So I love, I want to run a clip now for people who are either listening, and you can watch this too. And I want to get Cathie's response to it, because you also have a vision for the future for your kids, right? So you have this collective. Are there going to be more, by the way? You want to tip us off?
Well, I really hope not.
Okay, good.
Coming through me.
Okay, all right, okay.
Grandkids on the way, though. There's, I've got some grandkids here, and there's some on the way. So
that is right. So I got a little ahead of myself on the clip I want to run, but you, the Community Foundation, did a little quick story on something that you did that would collectively, kind of bring them together around a common cause, something in a financial nature. I love the story, so I'm going to run that now, and then I'd love to get your response in a second.
It would be such an awesome thing to see, even in Lancaster County, to see a massive growth in the impact of young people. When I started my fund, the whole point was to set up something that would outlive me. And my plan was to eventually kind of turn it over to my kids. We've gotten them started in actually volunteering very early, because obviously they didn't have a bunch of money in their pockets to give, so you give of what you have, and that's giving of your time. It didn't matter, what it was, we were going to get them involved. So whatever they could do to be helpful, we were going to roll up our sleeves and go get involved. Gradually, we got them kind of involved. They found their passions. And then they started asking, well, Mom, can we give to this and give to that? And I was like, you know what? What if I actually set up a donor-advised fund like the one I had set up for myself, what if I set that up and let them take it over? And so I called the community foundation and I said, could we do this? And they said, we've never had that question. We'll look into it. And they eventually came back and said, yes, we can do it. And we signed Lydia. And then earlier this year, we signed Caleb. And hopefully in another couple years, we'll sign Joshua and Nathaniel, and maybe we'll even make it to the grandkids. All of our diversity, when we actually gather together, we can make a huge impact. Everybody coming together and working together for a common goal. Yes, we may have different backgrounds and we may be different age groups, but we can work together. And it's possible. You just have to make it a conscious choice that that's what you're going to go after. For me, the Community Foundation has been such a huge blessing, and it's just simple for me to work with them because they handle the things I'm not good at. I walked in here 9 years ago as a mom with 3 little kids at home. I didn't walk in with, a bunch of money to be able to write one big check. I grew my fund over time, little bit by little bit. You don't have to be a super wealthy person to be able to make an impact. You'd be amazed how much need is out there and how easy it can be for you to actually make an impact.
Okay, so I love that. I mean, it's just so touching to see that it's not just about yourself. It's so much about I call it paying it forward because we've heard that phrase a lot.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. What went into that, and what does that mean to you now and into the future?
Sure.
In your words.
Yeah, well, I actually started working with them when I was in my very late 30s. I was getting ready to turn that big 4-0, and I was freaking out because I hadn't accomplished things in my life. Somehow I was a failure. I hadn't done all the things on my bucket list. And when I stopped and thought about it, there was really kind of only one thing that was really bothering me, and that was what was going to live on beyond me. And I had always wanted to start a foundation, but the reality was, short of winning the lottery, which God has not ever done for me.
Well, and you got to play to win, they say, right?
Yeah, and I, even when I play, he just goes, yeah, no. It might get to $1 billion, but I'm not ready for you to steward that. So just
exactly.
Go back to your job.
I love it.
So I was like, okay, I got to find something. And I stumbled across this idea of a donor advised fund. And I'm like, well, okay, now I found what I want. Now, where do I go find it? And, how do I get it? And so I ended up at the Community Foundation, and I wasn't the typical person that you would see walk through the door. I wasn't some, gray-haired old white man or something, who's loaded with money. That wasn't me, And so, they took a risk on me. And it was successful. And then, of course, I, kind of kept going. And then when my kids started making all these comments like, Mom, could we give to this? Could we give to that? It just became a natural progression to ask the question about starting them. And so that's what we did. And, the first one was kind of is this going to work? We don't know. But since then, I mean, Lydia has been able to impact, orphans in Kenya, the Ukraine, Guatemala. Then we launched Caleb, and he's been able to impact families that are, struggling with food insecurity in Harrisburg and Lancaster and beyond, and so it's exciting because to me, it's kind of like my philanthropic 401k.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And I, in the book, I mentioned, the concept of legacy, which for me is leaving an everlasting gift to affect change in youth.
Oh, wow. Perfect.
The letters all spell it out,
Perfect. I love it.
So, it's all about empowering the next generation. And, you never know what the impact is going to be that you're going to have. After I finished writing the book, again, we had talked a little bit about how I've got this kind of nerdy habit of doing genealogical research. Well, I happened to have pulled up my great-grandfather's obituary on my dad's side of the family. And I noticed this one line in the middle of it where it mentioned that he had served on the board of his church and was involved with the building fund, in the building committee. And I was like, well, now that's interesting. So I went back and did some research on that church and, roughly the time frame, and I found some stuff in the newspapers. Well, they were building the children's wing of that little church. That little church is where I accepted Christ.
Oh my gosh. I love that.
So, I mean, who knows when he was working on that 10, 15 years before I was even born, whether or not he actually thought about the impact that was going to happen. Was he thinking, oh, this will just help somebody's kids? Or was he thinking, this could be my own great grandchild. The fruit of my work is going to be my own, offspring. And so, I look forward to when I get to heaven, I'm going to like pull him aside and go, dude, what were you thinking when you were working on that
Yeah.
project?
Help me understand. What was
Yeah.
that about? Yeah.
And like, did you get up there? And God goes, hey, remember that project you were working on? Look what just happened down there, because it was about the time he passed away that I accepted Christ at that tiny little church, and,
And you never got to share that. I'm sure he didn't quite yeah.
well, because interestingly, I don't remember him ever being in that church, because the last memories I have, he was at a birthday party and he was in a wheelchair. And I remember that church not being particularly accessible. So,
Oh gosh.
I don't remember ever once seeing him there. So I never even realized he went to the church until I read that obituary.
Oh my goodness. So, okay, perfect. Legacy, perfect example of what it means when knowingly or unknowingly, when we commit to a cause like you have here.
Yep.
The best part I think about it is everything about Plan A and your children, the ones that God gave you naturally and the ones he gave you because they were appointed in another way for you to adopt and to bring them into your fold, just like he did us. Like that whole piece and what you've now created for them to someday, when you're not here or you're there, or your grandkids, right? So you've got them on the docket now. so now they become part of this, and it won't be as much about how much money. The money is not the issue, right? It's the impact. So something will happen, like food insecurity, the things that you were talking about. They go on a trip, Ukraine, whatever it is. Like that's the stories. So we're talking about big God stories here in people's lives, and you've shared an amazing one with us today about your life and how God then motivated you to put it in writing. And what I love about the legacy piece you're talking about, see, this gets to live on.
Yeah.
It's like the internet, where you do social media posts and they're there forever, even though you delete them. Okay. What I love about this physical copy of your story and the ones that, others have written, and like God gets to like drop them in people's laps at the most inopportune time. They read them and they go, just like I'm doing this, this C.S. Lewis story is amazing. And his story, his legacy and Tolkien and how they commiserated together. And just who knows if we'd even have Lord of the Rings if the two of them didn't walk together in the, strolling at Oxford, I mean, it's just amazing stories like that. And what you've produced here and what others legacy, we won't have any clue as to how it'll impact future generations. It's exponential.
Oh yeah. I've told, the woman that helped me get the book published and various other people, I already have them scheduled for lunch in about 100 years. And we're going to sit down in the coffee shop in heaven and go, hey.
Yeah. I wonder if we'll have Outlook calendars in heaven. I don't know. I think eternity is a long time. We can just, we can figure it out. I know, Cathie, there's going to be numbers involved, genealogies. There's going to be your accounting career, your financial career, which you're still charging ahead on. But probably the most significant contribution are going to be the legacy left with your children. And thank you. I mean, for sharing this, it's just been an amazing journey to hear and be a part of, right? So many years we weren't connected for a little while. And of course, I don't think anybody was for a couple of years there, but it was so good to be able to get you back on here and talk about this. What's next? Do you have anything, speaking of legacy, like what is your next is there a next thing that God is showing you? Or have we seen it here? Or is there something that's percolating that you're willing to share? Or maybe that's just something you want to hold. But what do you think? Anything?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of excited because this coming summer, Lydia is actually going to go visit the very orphanage that she's been supporting for the last 2 years. So I'm excited to see her go on a mission trip. It's like, it's one thing when she's sitting back here making grants, but to actually have the opportunity to see, the impact that she can make down there, that's exciting for me. I always joke about the fact that, they have yet to develop a mascara that can hold up against God moments. I feel like if I were on that trip, mascara, you don't have a prayer. Like, God's going to knock that out.
Yeah.
And I'm excited because I'm going to launch Joshua with his donor advised fund later this year.
Good.
So that'll be exciting, to get him started now. And then there's some books in the works. So
okay, I heard. That's what I was queuing you up a little bit, but
yeah. So
good.
I've been doing some writing, so hopefully there'll be some more stuff coming out. So.
Excellent. And I want to say it, and I've read the majority of this. I will tell you that it's so well written. You did such a great job at capturing in simple terms your life, and it's an easy read. It's so I don't know, just down to earth and real. And raw in some moments too. You just put it out there, and that's just what we're called to be, authentic, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you are one of the most authentic people I've ever met. So,
well,
with that in mind, you mentioned in here, and you have a website, and you have, I believe, and you have ways that people can contact you. I will put them in the show notes. I'll give you a chance to share that now because I know you're available to speak on this topic. Yep. You're available to whatever someone might, desire to be able to reach out and help them. I know that's you. So tell us if somebody wants to get a hold of you, what would be the best way to do it? Sure. And what is the connection that they can kind of draw into, if you will?
Sure. The book is available on Amazon. You can email me at contact@choosingplana.com. I'm also, I've got Choosing Plan A has a Facebook page and stuff. So, or you can hunt on my name, Cathie Henry Rosado. So
perfect.
Ways to hunt me down, or
nice.
Call Steve and
call me. Just send me an email. I'll get you connected with her. Absolutely. You know how to get me anyway.
Yeah.
We'll put those in the show notes too. And anyway, anybody that's watching this later and or listening and wants help, just drop me a note, get a hold of Cathie. I'm sure her journey is going to be fascinating to watch, and I'm going to get a front row seat because we're buddies, and my wife and I, right? So I'm sure that we'll have you back when the next cool thing happens. It maybe not part of a God story series, but there'll be something significant about it. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with me and be with our audience. Any parting words of wisdom you want to share?
I mean, just honestly, life is one big adventure. So when you love God and you love people, you get set off on the most amazing adventure. You get to meet the most amazing people, and it's fun. It's honestly fun. Yeah, there might be some tough times, but it's fun.
Perfect. Well said. Thank you, everyone. Be back again next time around. Keep an eye out for the next episode of the podcast, and bless you all. Thank you, Cathie, very much.
This was another episode of the Embracing Brokenness podcast. For more information on Embracing Brokenness Ministries, or to subscribe to our blog, podcast, YouTube channel, or engage with us on social media, please visit our website at embracingbrokenness.org. Thanks for joining us.